Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session called Embedding Resilience Building and Financial Inclusion into Climate Adaptation and Mitigation Innovations for Smallholder Farmers. During this fireside chat, I, along with three of my colleagues from various organizations, will be speaking about the term resilience and how it has factored into our work as agriculture financial inclusion actors who are working really hard to increase incomes and strengthen livelihoods of rural households. And we'll aim to talk specifically about women farmers as much as we possibly can. My name is Lakshmi Iyer. I'll be moderating this session today. I'm the Director for Innovations in Agriculture at Grameen Foundation. And I'm joined here by three really great speakers. They'll introduce themselves as we go through the session. And I'd love to turn the conversation over to my colleague, Bobby, to speak a little bit more about the link between resilience building at large and financial inclusion and what the research is showing. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Lakshmi. Hi, everyone. I'm Bobby Gray. I'm Senior Research Director at Grameen Foundation, and Grameen kind of works at this intersection of agriculture, financial services, and gender. So as Lakshmi was saying, kind of this focus on the female smallholder farmer is something that's really core to the work that Grameen Foundation does. I would say, to kick us off on the concept of resilience, that several years ago, around 2016, we had the opportunity with some funding from CGAP to really think about the connection between financial services and resilience. But we first had to define what is resilience. And in the study, we started it in Burkina Faso, and the women that we interviewed, something that's always stuck with me is that they had this concept or this phrase that we're like lizard eggs. We have to hatch ourselves. And it really demonstrated kind of this importance of household perseverance, like taking care of one's own family as kind of being core to how they thought about the concept of resilience. And within, thinking about all the research that maybe was already out there just on resilience, and a lot of it was kind of in the health space. And there are kind of these two different types of resilience. There's this idiosyncratic, the types of shocks that people have, that, when we're thinking about resilience, there's these idiosyncratic shocks where individual households are impacted by shocks and stressors. And then there's these covariate shocks where, larger groups of people are impacted at the same time. And I think this is where a lot of the conversation around climate resilience comes into, like, how do we respond to shocks that affect a lot of people at the same time? But in both cases, you have to work on both, right? Like, you have to think about what are the individual strategies that households need to have to kind of anticipate and respond to shocks. And then you have to kind of think about what happens when everybody's impacted. So one of the projects that we had in Burkina that followed this research was to look at women savings groups. And we were specifically looking at the impact of like a health savings and loan, because we were doing a lot of work on this kind of integration of health and microfinance. And through the research that we did, we found that, the households that had a larger portfolio of financial services perceived themselves to be more resilient. And they also had fewer negative coping mechanisms. So the more services that they were able to leverage within their household, the less likely they were reducing food consumption when a shock, actually happened. And so I think, part of our position around, thinking about climate resilience is that we have to kind of keep working on the financial products that are out there. There's the new research around mobile money and how people can really leverage their social networks. But one of the things that we discovered is that no matter what, even if people can anticipate something and plan for it, they're still going to experience it like a shock. And so everything that we can do to reduce, the paperwork, the time it takes to access a financial service, that's really important. And I don't think right now, there's still room for improvement, I guess I would say, on just the basic financial products and services. And then maybe I'll end on another project that we had working with cocoa farmers in Ghana is that, part of they're trying to rebuild and regrow a lot of the cocoa trees because they're 30 years old, and climate change is really impacting the productivity of those smallholder farmers. And one of the things that, we thought they needed primarily some sort of big investment to, renovate their farms. But what we discovered is that, the cost of doing like the planting is not as expensive as just the time it takes in between. And what people were actually seeking credit for example, were the emergencies, the somebody's getting sick, they need school fees, somebody had a funeral, and they weren't going to financial service providers. They were going to the cocoa trader in their community and, reselling, basically covering the cost of their loan when they took their beans in. And so I think that just kind of demonstrates the type of flexibility that we also need to be thinking about. How do they want to access credit? And, think about the diversification strategies that people need while they're planting and waiting for trees to grow, was one thing that, we had to think about, even though we weren't able to align the financing at the time for this kind of long-term view. It's something that we recognize is really necessary for smallholder farmers as well. So maybe I'll end it there and just kind of say, I think, we're trying to look at these from all these different perspectives. And I think in the covariate shock area is one area that we probably have a lot more investment to be making to ensure that the products and services really help large groups of people at one time.
Thanks, Bobby. I think what's really interesting from what you suggested is that there's a large body of work that's already been done around resilience building, and the inclusion between the nexus of resilience and financial inclusion has long been studied. There's a lot of research stemming from it. There's a lot of really good work, as you've highlighted, coming from that entire nexus. But it's almost as if we now, as an ecosystem, as organizations working towards this, need to come together, put our heads together, see what is really going to work for climate resilience now. And there are some serious implications, as you suggested, through the definition of these two different types of shocks with respect to how the solutions need to be catered for and shifted to a certain extent. Oh, thanks so much for that. I want to turn to Baz now, Tropenbos, to talk a little bit about how the Tropenbos approach operationalized in Ghana intersects perhaps with the research findings that Bobby spoke about. And Baz, if you wouldn't mind talking about the work at large and talking a little bit about the findings that Tropenbos is coming up with.
Okay, thank you very much. I think actually just want to say something about Tropenbos itself as well. Yeah, because we are part of a network. We call it the Tropenbos Network, and we are local NGOs in 8 different countries at the moment. One of them is Ghana. So I really recognize also what Bobby just told us. And yeah, we're looking actually for locally owned evidence-based solutions to global and also local biodiversity, climate and development issues. Yeah, for that we work in landscapes which usually are in the agriculture forest transition zone. And this is really a quite difficult area to work because many services are not there. Yeah, for example, in Indonesia, we found that banks do not get into that area. Yeah, so they basically depend on things like the village saving and loans associations, or some of them that group together becoming credit unions. Yeah, but in most of the landscapes where we work, we really find also what Bobby then said. Okay, there's increasing impact of climate change. Yeah, and usually all people are, or most people are affected, and that comes that's then due to the fact that they basically work on one single crop. In Indonesia, this is oil palm. Yeah, in Vietnam, it's coffee. Yeah, in Ghana, it's cocoa. Yeah, so we thought, okay, then the solution would be to start working on agroforestry. Yeah, and definitely I think in time, this would be a solution, a diversification. If then something happens to the cocoa, you can take it out, but you still have your trees, you can continue selling. Of course, a big drop in your income at that time, but you still have something. Yeah, so you would still have that for your emergencies. Yeah, but then also we found that it's not a panacea, because if you condemn now, for example, in Ghana, with the cocoa plantations, which need to be basically removed. Part of the impact of climate change is a much more presence of the cocoa leaf virus, yeah, which basically kills the trees or considerably reduces their production. So you have to cut them down, yeah, and then you have to start. Well, if you start, also trees will take some time before they grow. So you have the same problem, that making that switch, yeah, to a more diversified system, you still have the period in the beginning where you don't have an income. Yeah, and we haven't really yet found a solution to that, although many local solutions are interplanting food crops. Yeah, but those food crops, and also later in the agroforestry system, you see that yeah, technically it sounds a good solution, but then you come with, okay, what do you do with the products? If you cannot sell the products, you still don't have a diversified system. Yeah, so we have to start working also with well, initially local off-takers until we can scale it up, and then also look at international off-takers. But for them also, and to make it attractive for both the off-takers and the producers, we need to look at something in the middle where the producers can participate in adding value to the product. Yeah, for example, simple things like drying the cocoa beans. Yeah. Or in other cases, we're looking at other waste products of the cocoa beans, of the cocoa harvest, yeah, and trying to transfer that in, for example, briquettes for energy. Yeah, that also needs some pre-processing and some storing. So they need little investments there, and at the moment it's very difficult to get that. Yeah, the local financial systems, they're not interested in that because it's new, so they don't know how it's going to work. Yeah, the investments that are needed are small, 10,000. Yeah, but it's too big for microfinance. It's too big for the village saving and loans associations. So at the moment, we're really looking at solutions for that. And one of them we hope to have found through co-investments of the off-takers then. Yeah. So that I think, yeah, that shows really or it showed us really that we cannot do it by ourselves. We need to work in partnerships, and the partnerships need to include financial organizations as well. And we're trying to do that with an impact investor and a local bank to look at if they can provide financial products, formal financial products, but not with the current market rates, which are like 35, 37, 38%. Yeah, that's just not doable. So that is something, but that still doesn't cover that period in between, yeah, in between having nothing and planting your cocoa and then getting your first harvest. Yeah, some of that is food crops, yeah, but those do not really, yeah, we have a Dutch saying for that. I don't know how grass on the dikes. Yeah, so it's not really contributing to an income. Yeah, so we really need to look at how we can cover that, and yeah. So that I think would be I would like to hand it over then to Joost, because I think he might actually have at least partially a solution to that.
Thanks so much, Bas. Super interesting to hear your story. And hi everyone. My name is Joost Hamelink. I work as the Africa Partnership Lead for Acorn. It's very interesting to hear both Bobby talking about some of the challenges in climate resilience, inclusive finance, and Bas talking about agroforestry. I think those are all topics and challenges that we very much recognize. So yeah, Acorn is an initiative by Rabobank, and the idea of Acorn is to help smallholder farmers to get access to income from the carbon market. And even though that is the idea, it's not necessarily the objective, because the objective, what we really want to achieve with Acorn, is that we want to help millions of smallholder farmers to transition to agroforestry. And we see that the carbon income is not the only solution and not the only key to achieving that, but it is an extra layer of income, an extra layer of incentives that can help the farmers to make that transition to agroforestry. And that's really what we want to achieve, because the carbon income, yes, it's nice, but the other benefits of agroforestry are also going to have a massive impact on the smallholder farmers when it comes, for example, to diversifying their income, to becoming more climate resilient. So we definitely recognize all those different benefits of agroforestry. And the way that we work, so we specifically target smallholder farmers, and yeah, basically that means in our model that we want to address some of the issues, some of the barriers that smallholder farmers are facing to get access to income from the carbon market. So, for example, we start by not charging any certification fees upfront. So that means that the financial barrier of entry into our program is very low as possible. Another example, when it comes, for example, to monitoring, we use remote sensing satellite data to keep the monitoring costs down, especially when we're working with large groups of smallholder farmers, that we still keep the cost manageable. But I think the most important thing is when it comes to benefit sharing, because there we are able to sell at a relatively high price. We use a minimum price of 20 euros per ton of carbon, and 80% of the benefits go back to the farmers. And that's really for us where it makes a difference. We really feel that the farmers are doing the majority of the work. It's only fair that they get rewarded for that. And just to give an interesting example of some of the impact that we're already seeing in the field, we started relatively recently, but we already have a couple of projects that were able to do payouts to the farmers. And just to give an example, one of our first projects was with a coffee cooperative in Tanzania. Actually, the cooperative that we were working with was completely overasked. They really had to upscale their capacity when it came to seedlings. And what is interesting to see, even though it's only an option within our payment model, because the default option is that the farmers, when they get their 80%, they get everything either in cash or with a mobile payment. But there's also the option that the farmers, as a group, collectively can reinvest part of their carbon income into the agroforestry project. And even though that's only an option, and farmers are free to decide in council meetings whether or not they want to do that, we see so far that pretty much all of our projects, the farmers are deciding to actually reinvest a section of their money into the agroforestry project. So we see that carbon income is then being used to sponsor a nursery program, or extra technical assistance, or a beehive project. So we're very happy to see that. One thing that may be interesting to mention also, because Bobby, you talked about inclusive finance and how to address women farmers, for example. So of course, gender equality is very important to our program too. So, for example, in our certification, we ask the different partners that we work with to describe how they will address those issues of gender equality and inclusion in their projects. And we do see that in some cases or in some activities that goes really well. So, for example, we look at the participation of female farmers in the trainings or the technical assistance or the seedling programs. We do see that most of our projects are actually pretty close to 50-50, or even have more female than male farmers. But there's a couple of other aspects of our program where we're still facing some barriers. So, for example, one of the things that we have to look at before we can do payouts is land tenure. So, who holds the right to the land, or what is the land tenure situation? And we do see there that for a project, even where the participation is 50-50, the land tenure situation can have a very different ratio. And another challenge that we're facing sometimes is when it comes to actually doing the payments. So then the farmers need to have access to either some kind of mobile payment option, or even a bank account or something like that. And then we also see in some places where we work, that ratio then all of a sudden is very different from the participation rate that we see in our projects. So just, those are some of the challenges that we're looking at, and we're obviously continuously looking for solutions and how we can make that better.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much, Houston. Thanks, Baz. Thanks, Bobby. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here with this conversation. And I know that there's a lot more to be saying. And I know our audience who's probably listening is, wanting to dig in a little bit more. Unfortunately, I think we're at the end of the session. So I'd love to just kind of go around everybody, if you wouldn't mind saying kind of your one kind of key lesson that you love the audience to kind of take away from the work that you've done around climate resilience and financial inclusion. What is kind of like what is one thing that you'd love for the audience to take away as they dig a little bit deeper into what the intersection could look like for them with respect to climate resilience and financial inclusion, what more they can be doing? Bobby, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Sure. I would say I think we still need to continue investing in just the basic financial services that people need access to. I think even was pointing to the point of, in some cases, they find that people don't have access to the bank account or the mobile money account that they can receive a payment from. So I think continuing to invest in making the products and services more approachable, more responsive to shocks and stressors that households have. But I think, as I kind of pointed out in my talking points, one of our realizations is that that is a component of it, but we need to be thinking about these covariate shocks and what are the efforts that we need to be making within that space. And I think Joost and Boz, have kind of pointed to two, examples of what they're kind of doing in that space as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think that's really true. And I think when you and I were chatting a little bit, I think you had also mentioned the various ways in which Acorn is aiming to support women smallholder farmers as well. In terms of thinking through kind of some of the payment structures and trying to time it with the partners in play such that it becomes very useful for women, whether it's during a hunger period or whether it's a time period when school fees are due. So that thought process is definitely there. And I'm not sure if you wanted to take it any further or if you wanted to say anything more about kind of your one key takeaway for the audience.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lakshmi. I think, you definitely have a good point there when you talk about the timing of the payments. So that's one thing that we definitely see. There's of course always some technical and let's say ecological factors to that, but definitely also let's say a socioeconomic factor to that. Like, what does it mean for the household when we decide about when we do the payment? And I think one particular point, one particular takeaway, one particular challenge that we see is when we talk about transitioning to agroforestry, we very often see that the benefits of that transition will take a while to materialize. Usually, if you start now to transition, it will take 2 or 3 years for the first carbon income to come in. Maybe the crops that you're planting, it will also take a while to come in. So I think a challenge that we're really trying to address is how can we support the farmers in those first 1, 2, 3 years to make that initial investment and to really make sure that they can sustain that first period of 2 to 3 years before the different sources of income start to come in.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think timing is so key on multiple factors and the technical support needed for that. Also key. Buzz, I turn to you for the last word with respect to anything you'd like to leave as a parting words, parting lessons for our audience.
Yeah, I think partnerships are crucial. Yeah, you can hear already financial support and it needs to differ between different periods. Yeah, technical support is important, but you also heard from Joost that you need some political support as well, because if the land tenure, in some countries, if it doesn't change, or not just land tenure, but also tree tenure, if you talk about carbon, or in some countries, even specific carbon tenure. So you need those partnerships. And I think specifically important is there to make sure that also women have a role in those partnerships, because very often they set up the partnerships and still women don't say anything, so or don't have a say in that. And then you can see things like financial products, for example, that do not address the needs of women. Yeah, and we've seen that in several occasions already. The same thing, technical assistance that designed in such a way that women cannot participate. For example, trainings at night. Yeah, many women cannot do that at night. So women need to be able to participate in the decision making within those partnerships.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the three of you. I think I hope that we're leaving the audience with some really interesting points that they can take away and think about when they think about how we need to strengthen the linkages between financial inclusion and climate resilience. Take care, everybody.
All right. Thank you very much.